Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Om Shanti 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 Om Stay. Okay. Ish. What's happening here? So, getting stuck here. Okay. As we know, duality is the problem that causes samsara. Samsara is a psychological problem experienced by most all human jivas, because we see objects, we develop attraction and repulsion, and then we fall for the delusion that we could control the field of objects. The objects appears regardless of our desire because it belongs to Maya Ishwara. And we try not to fall for this magnetic pull of attraction and repulsion, which compromise one's mental discrimination and also our emotional stability and equanimity, peace. Everything is disturbed because of the appearance of duality. And there is nothing we can do about that. And then, as we know, the yogis want to cancel duality by going into a certain state of self-induced sleep, deep sleep, referred as nirvikalpa samadhi. So that is a solution as well, but it only gives temporary relief because the mental state of nirvikalpa modifies, and then one finds oneself again back in the awakening state in which the duality experiencer and experience appears, object, and the knower of the objects, the perceiver and the perceived appears. No? So Vedanta is about tackling or addressing the problem of samsara that I often like to present as a psychological suffering experienced by human beings. The suffering is due to ignorance and self-ignorance, which brings about the delusion that I can control the field of objects and only attract my objects or my likes. And then we suffer insecurity among many other things. Insecurity, why? Because the field not only does not provide us with permanent resolution or classification, because we can control the objects projected by Maheshwara, but if the complexity or difficulty was not difficult enough, the object projects are changing all the time from moment to moment. So now the projector is changing. I cannot control those projections. On top of that, the objects are changing and the mind desire or fearing the objects is also changing. So we get a picture how impossible this mission is, and to find happiness by controlling one's experience, controlling the object of experience. There is another way. Vedanta suggests that there is another way that we can tackle the problem of samsara. The mind reports duality in the waking state, in the dream state. So how the mind is not going to report duality is a very refined and sophisticated method presented by Vedanta. And we all know how we do that. We do that by understanding the Mithya nature of duality and the real nature, the Sat nature of I, limitless infinite consciousness. Therefore, we must learn, in the light of the teachings of the Upanishad, to tackle the duality reporting mind. This tackling of the mind is what Gaudapada called Amani Bhava. Converting the problematic mind into a non-problematic mind is the solution. So we looked into that. What is a problematic mind? So what do you guys think? What is a problematic mind? Please help me out.
The mind that sees duality and responds accordingly.
The mind that sees duality attributes reality to duality, to the object, and that very mind that attributes reality is unavoidably moved by desires and aversions, total ignorance, and that causes a problematic mind to suffer. The entire world of moving and non-moving objects is reported by the mind in the awakened state and the dream state. When the mind becomes no mind, or no mind, that's when the mind is tackled properly. There is no reporting of duality. That's what that needs to be done. How will we do that? We'll do that. So again, when the mind becomes no mind, there is so many concepts about that. No? So Ramana Maharaj, Papaji, and many others would say, what is the mind? There is no mind. Okay? So just discover the no mind and stay in the no mind state. No? So it gives the impression that the mind has to stop perceiving apparent duality. So the mind to become no mind, it only takes the mind to understand its true nature as free, limitless consciousness, and then the mind, which has totally identified itself with consciousness, is not different from consciousness, and see the thinking, thought, discerning, and memory system, emotional, sees everything as objects, Mithya objects within I, Satya, the pure limitless consciousness. So how the mind is going to be reported as no mind? You report the mind as consciousness. You understand? So am I going to become unable to transact in the world, dysfunctional? No. The mind, which is like Ramana and Papaji used to say, is just a bundle of thoughts. And Gaudapada is going to present the mind much on those lines as well. The mind is seen objectively, okay? Because the mind is self-reflective. It's not that consciousness is going to see the mind. The mind, which is a mixture of consciousness and thoughts, the conscious aspect is going to understand the material aspect made up of thoughts and feelings and concepts and notions. The mind becomes the no mind, is seen as pure limitless consciousness is the only solution. And then that mind is not going to take duality as reality. It's not going to take the world, the phenomenal universe of many, the numberless objects, is not going to take that seriously because it was understood that it's just a projection occurring within myself. I, the mind behind the mind, as we may say as well. Verse 32, by the knowledge of the Ātmā, which is the reality. When the mind does not perceive duality, then the mind ceases to be the mind. In the absence of objects to be perceived, it becomes a non-perceiver. Verse 32. Again, it has to be seen in a very, very careful way. So the mind itself has several functions, as we know. The ego, the thoughts, the emotions, the intellect, and so on. As we know, the intellect is the supreme judge with the highest ability or power to learn and discriminate and discern and connect the dots and determine what is reality we see in the mind here and what is just mithya. By the knowledge of the Ātmā, which is the reality, when the mind does not perceive duality. So it's the same principle. It's not that we need to go in deep sleep or in Vikalpa Samadhi, because when we go in deep sleep in Vikalpa Samadhi, there is no cognition in the mind. The mind needs to be holding its cognitive power to get self-knowledge, and to hold, to keep that vision of reality. By the knowledge, I am the Ātmā, the only reality, without a second. I know that I am this Ātmā consciousness. And then when the mind does not perceive duality, when the mind resolves itself in consciousness, and then the mind understands that duality is just an appearance, a superimposition of objects within I consciousness, and I use a certain instrument of perceiving, instrument of knowing, of experience, which is the reflected consciousness, which retains my same nature, but it's reflect, and it is self-reflective. Therefore, it can understand its original nature as pure consciousness and understand its reflected nature as thoughts, feelings, emotions, and viveka, and can distinguish and not make a confusion between the two. And then when the mind perceives reality, perceives duality, but knowing that all there is I consciousness. But it has to be understood by the mind itself, reflected consciousness. But what kind of mind is that? Is a mind that has identified itself as consciousness. Is the mind that has identified itself as consciousness a mind or no mind? It's just a word, play of a word. It's both, you know? Suppose a dog discovers that the dog is a human being, and by mistake he came as a dog this lifetime, and he's an enlightened dog. So is that dog now a human being or a dog? You understand? So he has the knowledge. No, I am a human being, but for some mistake. So it's both. Yeah. In its understanding of the dog is that I am a human being. So good. Appearing as a dog. So the mind is consciousness appearing as the ego, the subtle body, and so on. The message that because of the mind, now let me go through the verses too. Then it ceases to be the mind. So there is no confusion for us because it ceases to identify as the mind. It ceases to identify as reflected consciousness because it has gained the knowledge of the Ātmā. The whole goal here is self-knowledge, the knowledge of the Ātmā. As the verse begins, by the knowledge of the Ātmā. Once the mind got the knowledge of the Ātmā as its very nature, it ceases to be the mind in the sense that, oh no, now I do not identify anymore. I'm not a dog, I'm a human being, and I'm beginning to talk now with people around me. You know? And then it says, in the absence of objects to be perceived, it becomes a non-perceiver. This is the trickiest part of this verse. In the absence of objects to be perceived, it's probably referring to the deep sleep. In deep sleep, there are no objects to be perceived, and the mind becomes a non-perceiver. And this non-perceiver is easily resolved in consciousness as consciousness if we would have the intellect at its full capacity during the deep sleep, and then getting self-knowledge would be a piece of cake. Because you can infer that, oh, there is no duality, there is no object, there is no mind, yet I am. So what I am not the mind, and I'm not the object, the thoughts. I am something other than all of that. And then bingo, oh, I must be this so-called consciousness that people in the waking state talks about. No? In the absence of objects to be perceived, it becomes a non-perceiver. In the awakened state, the objects to be perceived, they remain being perceived by the mind, but the self-knowledge, the Ātmā, the knowledge of the Ātmā as myself, offsets the effect of the mind. All of that needs to be properly defined. When this kind of conversation comes into play, I like to present a certain definition of what is the mind, generally speaking. The definition of a mind is a bundle of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and determinations totally governed by self-ignorance and totally moved by attraction and repulsion. That is the common sense we have of what a mind is. And that's why mind has a terrible reputation in the spiritual world. That's why people like the idea of killing the mind. Now, generally speaking, the mind is what? It's just thoughts, feelings, emotions, and determinations under the spell of self-ignorance, which produce suffering, samsara. So what is the mind? The mind is consciousness, limitless, free from vasanas, free from ragas and dveshas, free from likes and dislikes. But we don't care about consciousness alone because we care to the fruits of self-knowledge, which goes to what? To the Jivatma, which is Brahman, but it's not Brahman. As Brahman, it does not experience anything. As Jivatma, as Paramatma, it does not experience anything. It's already beyond freedom and bondage. As a Jivatma, I want the fruits of this self-knowledge. So we want to enjoy the fruits of self-knowledge. So therefore, perception of objects are going to remain for the Jivatma, but it's going to be neutralized. It's a vidya power. The vidya power of this superimposition of Namarupa is going to be neutralized or offset by Ātmā. And it is as if this last phrase does not refer to the deep sleep state, we could bend it, interpreting that as if you experience the absence of the world while interacting with the world. You are interacting with the world, but you are neutralizing it, so to speak. It's a video effect by knowing that everything is just real, everything is only I consciousness, and all these superimpositions are occurring within myself. And then it's as if I'm not perceiving the world. Why? The world no longer has an effect of attraction and repulsion in the mind that has identified as Brahman, consciousness, the real, right? Gaudapada is presenting a subtle and profound Vedantic point. The message is that because of the mind, we experience the world of duality. The mind is functioning as the mind because the mind is experiencing objects. How can we function as the mind in the deep sleep in which there are no objects? The mind is over, gone, disappears, suppressed, howsoever. Yeah? So when the objects or the thoughts appear, the mind appears. Yeah? If one of these two disappears, the other disappears together. Duality is only possible in those states other than deep sleep in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And some say that there are several realms of duality in which you experience the experiencer, which the mind experience objects of experience on some subtle locus. No? So some say that it all goes on. Yeah? But therefore, besides the deep sleep and Nirvikalpa Samadhi, uh, the mind is going to perceive objects. The mind is function as the mind because the mind is experience objects. When you analyze whether the mind comes first or the objects come first, you again the same situation as the egg and the chicken. Who came first? You discover peculiar truths that the mind and the objects of the world are interdependent. So this reminds me of another misconception in the Neo-Advaita, at least in the past, 10 years ago, when I was still seeing what people in the Neo-Advaita were talking about. And some of those famous guys was saying that, no, the objects come and consciousness comes together. If the object disappears, consciousness disappears. You cannot have consciousness and the objects without objects and vice versa. And then they were coming to the conclusion that first comes the world of objects and then consciousness comes. And they present it with certain, articulation, and everybody, wow, this is the real deal now. Consciousness is a byproduct of matter. Yeah? It's the same what? It's the same misconception, it's the same confusion. They take the mind to be consciousness. They did not understand. And they are supposed to be enlightened people, and some of them are very famous. They make the confusion between the mind and consciousness. And here, they say, yeah, no, the mind, yes. The mind appears with the world appears with the mind. We can never determine who comes first, but they are interdependent. But we are not talking about consciousness. Most of these people in the Neo-Advaita does not teach Advaita at all, but they call themselves Neo-Advaita teachers. They teach dualities, literally. Both of them do not have an existence of their own, and both depend on one another. The mind is because of the world is because of the mind. They are mutually dependent. Both are mithya. Those are mithya, they are happening within satya, which is free, limitless, conscious existence. Both of them borrow existence from I consciousness, and I am something other than the mind and the world. How am I going to know this? The mind consists of thoughts. For every thought, there is a corresponding object in the external world. The mind is nothing but a bundle of thought. Every thought has a feeling to it. You think of love, you have a nice feeling. You think of hate, and you have a bad feeling. Every thought has a feeling, a sense, yeah? An emotion attached to it. It feels a certain way. Every object has a feeling attached to it. The mind consists of a bundle of thoughts, feelings in respect to objects of experience the world presents, the appearance universe presents to us. Thought, feelings. For every thought, feeling, there is a corresponding object in the external world. In other words, the thought of object is identical to the object which appears to the mind. So the thought of the object and the object are identical, and they happen simultaneously. And I'm editing here that the thought comes with a feeling or sensation as well. At the individual level, the mind is nothing but a thought, and the world is nothing but an object. Take a pot, thought, and there is a pot object. Is my audio still good?
Yep.
Take a pot thought, and there is a pot object. Any thought, and then there it is. So what it means to say, if I have a thought, my wife, immediately the wife appears to me in my mind as a subtle object. Impressions of the object that I'm very familiar in the quantity two, that is retained in the subtle level of the mind. Yeah? All the possible thoughts put together is the mind, and all objects of the world put together is the world. Very simple, very clear. The mind and the world be understood as thought and object only. The mind and the world must be understood as thought and objects only. What is an object? Is anything that I can objectify, experience, perceive, and know. The mind and the world must be understood as thoughts, which are attached to any object, that they are faithful to object. We never see a dog and we say it's a crocodile. It's always faithful to the object that appears. And then there is a consensus. If everybody sees a new animal, you know, and then we define a name for that form, and then we learn that there are some characteristics and properties of, and then we have knowledge of this animal X. So once we have this knowledge established as a consensus, and then every time that name comes, a thought comes, the shape and the properties and whatsoever we learned about that. Gaudapada says that when you reduce the mind and the world to thoughts and objects and analyze whether the thought is dependent object or vice versa, we find that they are interdependent. They cannot exist independent of one another. Without an object, there is no thought. Without a thought, there is no proof. This is strong. Without an object, there is no thought of that object, and without a thought, there is no way we can validate any object. There is no proof of existence of anything. If there is an object corresponding to which there is no thought anywhere, the existence of that object cannot be established. The existence of one cannot be proved without the existence of the other. This is the bottom line. Since both are mutually dependent, they cannot exist independently. The mind and the world are reduced to thought, and object is the essence of what's being said here, according to Swami Paramarthananda. Thought and object. So both of them are mithya, borrowing existence from I, Satya. That something is I, consciousness, Turiya, Ātmā, the self, the I. And I appearing to lend conscious existence to all inert and sentient objects in the cosmos. Thoughts and objects, they are blessed by me, consciousness. Therefore, from Ātmā, thought and objects borrow existence and rise together in the awakened state and in the dream, and they fall, resolve themselves together in the deep sleep state. The dream thought and the dream object exist simultaneously, always in Ātmā. The deep sleep, both the thoughts and the objects resolve themselves simultaneously. You cannot have one existing with the other resolving. You cannot have resolution of only one. We could say, oh, in deep sleep, all the objects and the thoughts, they disappear, but the mind remains there as aham, aham, aham brahmasmi. No, even that thought is not possible. That reminds me of the concept we have seen probably with you as well, of the difference between the Vedantic Nirvikalpa Samad and the Yogic Nirvikalpa Samad. Vedantic Nirvikalpa Samad, one enters in the no mind, no objects, no duality, with incredible momentum of that vasana, aham brahmasmi. And that unconscious or subconscious thought remains there. And one comes back feeling very refreshed and blessed, as if that knowledge was alive, even in the subconscious mind, producing even more ananda. The mind cannot survive if some object or the other, either external or internal, is not seen, perceived. The method is that thought and object, rise simultaneously, and they resolve simultaneously together. The mind and the world rise simultaneously, and they resolve themselves simultaneously. The ocean and the waves rise themselves simultaneously, and they resolve themselves simultaneously in what? Water. Both of them are mithya. Both of them borrow existence from something other than a namarupa. They borrow existence from I, Kriya. It's important to understand the adhisthanam of both, the wave and the ocean, the substratum, the support of both thoughts and objects. Trying to tackle the world alone will not work, and trying tackling the mind alone will also not work. This is very nice. It will end up in some other problem. Swami Dayananda says in psychology there is no solution. In Vedanta there is no problem. That is very nice, huh? Psychological insight. If you ever met a psychologist that do not further need more therapy, I will be surprised because they never solve their very problems. Because in psychology there is no solution, and in Vedanta there is no problem. Try to understand the root of both the world and the mind alone will help. That root is Ātmā, the Satyam. What is the Adhisthanam of the world and the thoughts, the mind? It is Turiya, it is the Ātmā, it is Satya, it is conscious existence. When the truth Ātmā, when the Ātmā is known, when the world and the Mithya will, when the true Ātmā is known as Satya, the world and the mind are understood as Mithya. The world and the mind will continue to be perceived and experienced. It will be like a movie on the screen of consciousness, Ātmā, they will continue to be experienced. So it's not that there is no perceiver. Most probably that last sentence was referring to the deep sleep state. You do not try to handle them independently. You do not negate them also. Negation. You cannot negate them unless you negate it with full conviction based on total understanding of what's Satya and what's Mithya. You, you do not negate them also. You only deflate the mind and the world of their reality. You cannot negate that the world is being perceived. This is delusion. Oh, there is nobody here. I'm not seeing anything. Why? Then why you did not stumbling and falling everywhere? No, you are perceiving at least the ground on which you make your steps. In those days with my first guru, there was a guy who used to look like my first guru and had a beard as well. And my first guru had a certain way of open and close the eyes and keep the eyes like this, and then he would open like that, and then everybody should be awakened when he opened his eye. And he used to walk in a very, very, very enlightened way. And there was a guy that looked like him that used to walk every time he was visiting. It's an Indian guy. Every time he was visiting, he was walking around and everybody was looking at him. Wow, where am I? Why I didn't remember this? You, you do not try to handle them independently. You do not negate them also. Yeah, this guy is saying, oh, there is nobody home, nobody here. I don't see anything. You know, you know, there is no world. There is only I. Delusion is not the way into self-knowledge and moksha. Do not negate the perception of the world. You need to deflate the mind and the world of their reality. Deflate. You just understand and stop projecting, attributing reality on this superimposition. You allow them to be because they belong to Maheshwara, and they are going to continue to be experienced, but they are not going to cause attraction and repulsion as before when we are under the spell of a video. This is samatma. This is equanimity. Namarupas are there, but they are not really producing duality and samsara. You allow them to be there, continue to be perceived and experienced, but they cannot cause samsara because you understood their apparent nature and they understood your real nature, and you know that both Mithya and Satya can never really touch one another. Satya is too subtle to be touched by whatsoever superimposition within Satya. Mithya is too dense to hold reality in Satya, and it is inert. Mithya is everything that is inert. Satya is everything which is conscious, self-conscious. The mind and the world are not tackled directly, but only understanding the truth of the world and the mind. We don't need to make a course in California about how to be an enlightened guru. Huh? You just have to understand certain things. The mind and the world are two, and the adhisthanam is one. The substratum is one. The screen of consciousness on which this apparent world reflects, such as a mirage, is one. The dream object and the dream thought are two, but the adhisthanam is one. The adhisthanam is the awaker. The awaker, over the awaker, the dreamer appears in a certain mental condition, and the dream world, the dream objects appear. What is the base? What is the substrate? What is the support for the dreamer and the dream world? Is the awaker. Simple parallels that gives us the understanding of the adhisthanam of the awaker, making a step forward here. The awaker alone is getting divided into dream thoughts and dream objects. The Ātmā, one Ātmā alone is appearing both. One Ātmā alone is appearing as perceiver and perceived, experiencer and experienced, knower and known. Understand the Ātmā, then both the mind and the world become like movie, similar to dream thoughts and objects. As you know, I'm kind of a month a year and helping my brother, and it has been a beautiful experience because I reconnect with my brother. So I moved away from Brazil, yeah, when I was a young man, and then my contact with my brother was Sheldon, here and there, sometimes visiting Brazil. And now I had the opportunity to spend this month, which was very nice. And I was talking to him and asked, Beto, doesn't it seem that everything we live together as family, as brothers, is exactly like a dream? It does not seem that it all happened in our mind. And then he looked at me and, well, maybe, But it feels that way so clearly in this context of coming back and reconnecting, recalling some of those passages in this lifetime. And it's all happening in the mind. Mind is reflecting as well this waking reality, physical, material reality. It's all happening in the mind. So therefore understand the Mithya nature of the mind and the world, and see the mind and the world as just a projection, such as a movie on the screen of the cinema. By gaining the knowledge of the truth, the true nature of the mind, the true nature of the world, with the help of a guru and the scriptures, that truth is known to be I, the Ātmā, the real. Never look for that Ātmā outside of your true nature, because the seeker is itself the thought. Famous statement. Huh? Never look for the self, the Ātmā, or Turiya, or Brahman, outside in the subtle or dense, gross world of objects. Know the Turiya, the self, Brahman, to be yourself and claim it, because you are never going to experience yourself objectively. When the mind does not report duality anymore because of this self-knowledge, thereafter the world will not be world, but will be only the Ātmā, who is disguised as the world in Ramarupas. Disguise is a beautiful word. The mind as well will not be the mind, but it will be consciousness disguised as the mind. Beautiful, huh? Very nice. You guys have any doubt? Can we stop doing these classes? We all got self-knowledge. Come on. Just joking. I enjoy as well. Not only you.
Well, we could stop, but it'd be such a shame because I enjoy it as well. It would be.
No, it's
And
our hobby.
So
It's our hobby. Huh?
it's so wonderful to do every week, 2 or 3 times. So it would be such a shame to stop.
The mind becomes no mind, and the mind is falsified. Both the mind and the world are falsified simultaneously. You cannot falsify one without the other. Many people try to do that. They falsify the world, but they hold reality to the mind because they think that the mind is consciousness. They superimpose the mind in consciousness without understanding the subtle distinction. In the absence of object, there is the absence of thought and the world. In my understanding, let's see what Swami is saying here. In my understanding, there is no such a thing called the world other than self, Ātmā. When he says, like in my understanding, he's talking, putting words in our mouths, you know. He say like, but in my understanding, that's how you have to see it. In my understanding, there is no such a thing called the world other than Ātmā. Pot can be negated by 2 methods. You just break it with a hammer, or you understand the adhisthana, the essential nature of the pot as pure clay. This is called wisdom, understanding the essential nature of any and everything which is not subject to what? Change. We don't like change. Nobody likes change fundamentally. There is nothing but clay alone, and only the name is superimposed on the clay. And this name creates a shape. The shapes creates raga and vesha. And then we are caught up in samsara, and we may even say, I like samsara because I like plurality and diversity, but fundamentally, nobody likes to suffer. Similarly, a Vedantin looking at the world loudly proclaims that there is no world. There is no world, there is only I. It's only I, the self, Ātmā, with different names and forms appearing within me. Just because there are many names and forms, there are not many things, because there is only I, consciousness. There is no mind, there is no world. The fundamental duality is I, the mind, and the world being a reflection within my mind. This duality has to be resolved simultaneously. You cannot resolve only one of them, both in consciousness as consciousness. Verse 33rd, The unborn eternal Ātmā has Brahman as the object of knowledge. They declare that the Ātmā is not different from Brahman, the object of knowledge. Hence, the unborn consciousness is without division. One knows the unborn Ātmā by the unborn Ātmā only. Okay. The unborn eternal Ātmā has Brahman as the object of knowledge. So we need, what is the distinction, the technical distinction between Ātmā and Brahman? We need to make some definitions here to understand what is trying to be said here, according to my understanding. Ātmā is a way to say that the Brahman, okay, or reality that we want to discover, let's say, is I, myself. Self is Ātmā. So self is Ātmā. So Brahman appears as Ātmā, which is a Sanskrit word meaning I, the self. This reflected Brahman. You know? So the unborn eternal self, I myself, you know, has Brahman. It is Brahman. It is consciousness. It's Ātmā appearing as Aham. Has Brahman as the object of knowledge. They declare that the Ātmā is not different from Brahman, the object of knowledge. Hence, the unborn consciousness is without division. One knows the unborn Ātmā by the unborn Ātmā only. This is very tricky, very technical, very profound, this statement here. We heard before this kind of similar statements say that only the self knows itself by itself, you know, by the grace of itself. But how so? If the self consciousness Brahman is not a knowing entity, how can we say that only the self knows itself by itself? Blah, blah, blah. So fundamentally, every knowledge exists or stands against ignorance. And then, as we know, Brahman, the self, is beyond self knowledge and ignorance. So how so? How can Brahman or the self know itself or have the self, have Brahman as an object of knowledge? Right? So whosoever becomes a seeker of the reality, seeker of the unborn nature of the I, of the Ātmā, of the self, whosoever is searching for this unborn nature of the eternal consciousness is going to have Brahman as an object of knowledge. Yes, in the beginning, although we hear that Brahman is not object of knowledge, but we cannot help but objectify Brahman, you know, until we come to the scriptures of the Upanishads. And then they say that Brahman is not an object of knowledge, but since you want to understand your nature in Brahman as Brahman, you have to use the scriptures, which is an object of knowledge. So, how are we going to objectify Brahman? Bringing your mind to the scriptures, the Upanishad scriptures, okay, which is an object of knowledge. So, what's the difference between a pramana, an object of knowledge, such as the scripture, and the self, the Aham Brahmasmi, which is the fruits of this knowledge? One is a means, the other is the end. Self-knowledge, the end. The scripture is the mean. The mean is an object. The difference between self-knowledge and scientific knowledge is that the fruits, the means, and the seeker are all one and the same Brahman, born. In object knowledge, objective scientific knowledge, there is division, the knower and the known. But here we talk about knowledge in regards to the true nature of the knowing entity. Therefore, as if consciousness under the spell of Maheshwara forget its eternal, limitless nature as the Aham, as the self of all jivas, and then has Brahman as one's ultimate pursuit of life, reduce Brahman into an object of knowledge until one comes to the final declarations of the Upanishads, until one's claim, yes, Aham Brahmasmi. Yes, I declare that Ātmā is not different from Brahman, and which is not different from myself as the Ātmā. They declare that the Ātmā, the Aham, the self, is not different from Brahman. Brahman, which was appearing before as an object of knowledge, hence the unborn consciousness is without division. It just appears to have the division, knower and known. One knows the unknown, the unborn Ātmā by the unborn Ātmā alone. So everything is happening in consciousness, but how so in Mithya is an apparent reality in which there is a division, knower, object of knowledge, and knowledge. So who is knowing anything? Fundamentally, is Brahman or Ātmā, the self, is knowing itself. One knows the unborn and Ātmā by consciousness alone. One knows consciousness by consciousness alone with the help of the mind searching for Brahman, which appears to be the object of knowledge before we claim Aham Brahmasmi. This verse is very beautiful, very profound. We can play with it, and I'm going to. Swami did not elaborate much, but we're gonna have fun with this verse next Monday. No? Monday, yeah, I will still be here. Lynn is gonna be in her home, and then next week we will do our second Mandukya class on Wednesday, and then Gita on Friday. Anything from you guys?
When I first read this verse, I thought it was just saying that consciousness is self-revealing, consciousness knows itself. But on reading it a second time, I see that it is referring to the scriptures. It says the unborn eternal has Brahman as the object of knowledge. And then it says they declare that the Atman is not different from Brahman. So they is obviously referring to the scriptures.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's very profound.
And it's important. It's very to the point to remember that consciousness or Brahman or the Ātmā can never be an object of knowledge because it's self-revealing, self-luminous. It's always there shining as Aham. So it's never going to be objectified by that which does the objectification, you know, which is the Aham. Consciousness becomes self-luminous, self-revealing, self-evident, you know, at all times. And it is a mystery why we take so time to understand and claim I am this Ātmā, I am this conscious existence. Huh? Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti 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 Om. Namaste. Thank you. Today is Friday. Next Monday, we meet again.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Beautiful
you,
class.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful
Much
class.
love.